Hello all my JUKI friends. My name is Alba and I'd like to welcome you to my sewing studio. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this adorable ladybug costume for your fur baby. I have my fur baby here, Flappy, as my model. Isn't he so cute? Now he does not come included. But we're going to go over some things that I really enjoy making. As a sewist, I think it's really important for everyone to have an arsenal of very quick, easy items to make for yourself, for friends, as gifts, and this is one of those projects. I'm going to go over the supplies that I'm going to be using, including some of the products that I've used. And I'm going to go over some alternatives because I know in different areas these products may not be available. So let's get started with the supplies. First, I'm starting off with a ready-made dog coat. Now, if you'd like to make your own dog coat, you can. There are plenty of patterns out there, but I got a fur coat that maybe has outlived its beauty. It might have some stains, it may need a little freshening up, and this is a good way to use that. I'm a big believer in recycling. So one dog coat that fits your dog, and I'm going to set that off to the side. Now there's two products that I use, and the first is I am using Heat and Bond Light. What Heat and Bond is a fusible web product. This turns any piece of fabric into a patch, and let me show you what I mean by that. So this is what the product looks like. It's shiny on one side and almost looks like wax paper on the other. And it gets adhered to my fabric, to the wrong side of my fabric. And I have one already done. And it melts into the fabric. Now when you remove that paper, and I will be doing this on this sheet, it becomes glue adhesive on one side and your fabric on another. And this will be used for the polka dots on the costume. Now, if you are fortunate enough that you find red fabric with polka dots in the right scale for this costume, great, then you won't need that step. I was not that fortunate. The second product I am using is a product called Peltex. This is by Pellon, and it is often used in making handbags. It's what gives handbags their structure and allows them to stand. Now, this is my Peltex, and as you can see, it is fairly straight. It holds up straight on its own, and it is firm. On your dog, this is what will let the flaps or the wings of the ladybug stand away from the body. Now my sample that I made here, I made with batting, and as you can see, they're floppy, and it works out great for my little doggy named Floppy, but Peltex is a great choice to have. We will need 2 squares of red fabric. Now, this is a very impromptu project. It's kind of hard for me to tell you what size you will need because I don't know what your fur baby looks like. So I'm going to give you some tips. Your dog coat, you do not want your square to be larger than your dog coat, including those flaps. This will overhang too much on your dog and cause him to be lopsided and might have some trouble walking. Now, this is especially true for the smaller dogs, more so than the larger dogs. But you want to measure that dog coat, and as you can see here, At my widest point, I went a little bit smaller, and we're going to cut a circle out of the 2 pieces of red fabric and our Peltex. Now, I was fortunate that I found this tray or platter, and this came from Dollar Tree. And when I saw this, it looks just about right. For the smaller dog, I didn't want to go too wide. This is a 14-inch circle, so I'm going to use this as a template. Now I'm going to move some of my things aside, and I am going to put my Peltex down on my 2 pieces of fabric with my tray, and I am going to simply trace this and cut it out. But I'm also going to show you how to draw the circle if in case you have a larger dog and you don't have something in your household that you could use to draw the circle. And I'm going to take that tray away. So here I was fortunate I had something, but let me show you how to draw the circle in your fabric. Now I'm getting both pieces of my fabric and I'm going to fold them in half. And I'm going to move Flappy and go to my ironing station. When you do this manually, it is really important to iron the fabric flat so that you get a really nice circle. So I am pressing that crease, and I am going to fold in half again. So what I have are quarters, and I'm doing this with both of my red fabric pieces. Now you would only do this, as I said, if you don't have something to trace to draw your circle. Now, let's say, for instance, my dog coat and my circle, I determine I want to do the wingspan or that circle that I'm cutting 20 inches. With the fabric folded, I would need to measure half of that distance or the radius of the circle. So I would get my ruler and I would go to that half measurement. Now I'm going to double check. This is a 14-inch, so I am going to need to line up my ruler to the 7-inch mark. And I'm going to draw that line on both of my folds. And I'm just using a regular pen because I'm going to cut right along this line. Now I am going to get that same measurement from the point and mark that. And everywhere in between those markings, I'm going to put a point. You want to have enough markings to be able to cut and follow the line. So I find that 4 to 5 are appropriate for me, but you want to go with your comfort zone. And now we're going to get our trusty fabric scissors, and we are going to cut along that line. And we're going to disregard that, and you're going to see that we're going to have that beautiful circle. And we're going to cut the circle out of our 2 pieces of red fabric and our Peltex. Now as I'm cutting the Peltex, you're going to see that this is thick. It's almost like a stiffened felt. Now, an alternative to the Peltex would be the foam stabilizer that is used for handbags, or a fusible batting that is fusible on both sides. When you use that fusible batting, it becomes very stiff and will hold the shape. Now I have my Peltex. Now when I put that in my hand, you'll see how that holds that structure, and that wing for the ladybug will lay up off your dog instead of around the body. And we're going to put this aside. Next, I'm going to show you how we're going to work with that fusible web product. Now let me get that all situated. I'm going to leave the name of that on the table just in case you missed it earlier. Now here is my one that's already fused, and I like to iron from both the front and the back side of this, and I'm going to show you what I mean. Now I'm working with a piece of black fabric, and all you need are scraps for this. This is for the circles for the body of our ladybug. So really any piece of scrap will work. I like to cut my fusible web and my fabric to about the same size because I do not want that glue residue going off on my ironing surface or wherever it is that I am working with this. So this is right about the same size. I'm going to move my ruler out of the way, and I am going to scoot over to my ironing station. Now, my first pass I like to do from the front of the fabric, just so that it gets a little bit sticky and starts to adhere. And I didn't leave that on long enough. Perfect. And then I want to move that to the opposite side. And what you want to do is not what I did right here. So I'm going to do that over. Next, we're going to be working with our Heat and Bond Light, our fusible web type of product. This type of product is available in many brands: Misty Fuse, Fusible Web, Heat and Bond Light. It is used to create patches, and I like to use this for applique. It is really important that before you iron, you realize where the glue side is. And when you feel it, one side is tacky, sticky, shiny, and one side is like wax paper. You want to put the sticky side to the wrong side of your fabric. Now I'm doing this on our black fabric for our dots for the ladybug costume. So fortunately there's really no right and wrong, but you want to make sure that you're ironing the glue to the wrong side of your fabric and not your ironing area. So I work from the right side of the fabric first, and I gave that a quick pass with the iron, and it starts to adhere to my fabric and become one. And then I like to go to the wrong side, because this is where I could see my edges aren't adhered very well. So I'm going to go back over that and eliminate any bubbles and really make sure that this is adhered well. And this is why I also like to cut the two pieces close in size, and I have a few areas that just need a little bit more heat. Perfect. Now we have our fabric that's adhered to the heat and bond light. And as I said, we really only need scraps of this because we will be using this for the circles. Now I'm going to make some room and get rid of some things. One other product that I'd like to talk about is the needles. Here are some anti-glue needles. Many brands and manufacturers make anti-glue needles, and I really highly recommend these. The coating that is on these needles is specifically made so that when the needle goes through this glue product, you don't get a ball of glue and the needle doesn't get hot where it interferes with that gluing process. This is really helpful, especially if you're doing multiple layers of glue products. Since we're only using one, it's not as noticeable with the gumming, but it will come up. Now we're going to cut our circles. And for me, for my size dog, I found that my spool of thread was just the right size for these circles. This is something where you're going to have to play this by eye. Of course, if this were a German Shepherd and my circle is much larger, I might want to go to a larger size circle. But for the circles, I've really found that if I look around my home, between glasses, cups, dishes, and my sewing notions, I've always found that right size. Or if you have that AccuCut Go and you have that circle die, you're absolutely able to do that. I am going to trace my circle onto the paper side of my fabric that's been adhered with that heat and bond light. How many circles do I make? It's completely up to you. You're making this costume for your fur baby, so you could determine how many you would like. Now, I think I'm going to go with either 6 or 7. I like odd numbers. I'd rather have 1 or 2 too many circles than not have enough. So as you could see, why I said a scrap of fabric is really all that you need. And we are going to cut these out. Now you do want to be careful cutting these circles out because these will be ironed onto our red fabric and the shape of them will show. So make sure you have some nice sharp scissors. Now the machine that I will be using today is my DX4000 by JUKI. This project can really be done with almost any sewing machine, so I'm sure that the one you have will work fine. I will be showing you some features and ways that I use this machine to do this project, but I will also go over alternatives if you do not have that particular feature. And I am just about done cutting my circles. And I am roughly laying them out so that I could see if I need to cut 1 or 2 more. I think that's perfect. I think Flappy is going to be the hit of the Halloween party. And I'm going to remove and get things out of the way for me. I'm going to set aside my little polka dots for my ladybug, and I'm going to concentrate on the 2 pieces of red fabric and the Peltex. Now I'm going to bring Flappy back out to explain, but you will see on the back, I did a cutout to allow for that hind quarter of your fur baby. I don't want it interfering with the tail or getting uncomfortable. And a ladybug does have 2 sets of wings, so I wanted to give that illusion to the costume. And we'll turn you around. He's a little bashful. He's been a good boy. Now, the way we're going to create that opening in the back, and I'm going to work with my fabric first and then the Peltex. I want to fold that in half, and I'm going to determine which one is going to be the back side. And at this point, it really doesn't matter. And I'm going to go back to my tray. Now, I want to determine where that cut is going to go, and I don't want it to be more than a 1/3 way up the body. So I'm going to do another fold where I'm folding my circle into 1/3. And I am going to just put a dot right at that 1/3 spot. Now you could use a pin, you could fold this, however you want to do that. But I want to mark a curved line in that fabric. And I am using that same tray to give me that line. Now, I am going to warn you, do not go too large with this. I'd rather see you go smaller than what you think you would like, because you could always cut larger, but if that opening is too big, there's no going back. So I am actually going to go about 1/4 of an inch in from that line just to see that opening, to see how I like that. So for all of you that are of my generation, this kind of looks like Pac-Man, doesn't it? But I think I am going to do that full cut and go along that. And this is what I meant by you can always cut more off. I cannot put that back onto that fabric. Now, you can always test this. And it looks like I may want to even go a little bit larger, because you could see where that's hitting that tail. So I am going to cut this even a little bit larger. And I'm going to do that by placing that back on there. Perfect. Now, the reason I use Flappy, as you can understand, it is much easier for filming with a dog that is not moving around and barking. Perfect. So now we have our circles cut, and this is 2 layers of that red fabric. And we left that opening, and this is where it's going to start to look like a ladybug. It looks like 2 wings. And now we're going to make that same cut on our Peltex. And I'm going to do that real easily by placing my fabric on the Peltex. And you may want to pin this down. You may want to trace. I am just going to cut right along that line. And I'm following the fabric. And I've removed that wedge. So it's starting to look like a ladybug, isn't it? I love this because it was just quick and easy to do. We are going to be moving over to the sewing machine. So just give me a quick second to get that all set up. And now we're back at the machine. I am at the DX4000, but this can really be done with just about every machine in the JUKI line. I will be showing you some of the setups and some of what I prefer to do. And one of the first things that we're going to do is get our 2 pieces of red fabric and Peltex. Our red fabric is right sides together, and with the solid fabric, most of them you really cannot tell the right side from the wrong side, so it makes that easier. And I've pinned the Peltex to that. I left these 2 pins just opposite of where the tail would be, so at the neck for the opening. And as you notice, I left those pins sticking out, so I know that's my stop point. And the rest of my pins I placed so that I could just keep sewing that curve. Now we will be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I do like to switch out to my 1/4 inch straight stitch foot and my straight stitch plate and feed dogs. Now, not all of the machines switch out feed dogs, but I do want to show this to you because it's actually a really good thing. Now, to remove my plate on my DX4000, I am putting the key in place, and I am just twisting and lifting to remove that plate. And I'm going to put that aside. And I am also going to show you a close-up of my feed dogs. The feed dogs are removable on this and several other machines that have that nice 12-inch throat space. I am simply lifting out and removing that feed dog. And the reason I love this is because I want to use my narrower foot for my seam allowance, and you see this set of feed dogs is much wider than the one designed specifically for this foot. And I am going to put this in place, and I'm doing that at an angle and just dropping that down. Isn't that just so easy? This is a JUKI exclusive that comes from that industrial world. I absolutely love this. And I'm just snapping my plate into place. What I love about this is that the machine knows exactly what I have put on the machine, and it knows it's in that straight stitch mode. And when I go to select my stitches, it's only giving me the appropriate stitches. So I am going to choose my straight stitch, and I am going to attach that foot on. Now, on other models of machines, you can use your 1/4 inch foot. And just check with your instructions if you need to select a specific stitch for that 1/4 inch foot. Let me put that away. Now on my stitch length, because I am sewing a curve, I like to make my stitch length a little bit shorter. So right now my stitch length defaults to 2.4. I am going to shorten that to 1.8. This will give me small, tight stitches so that when I turn this curved edge inside out, it looks nice and smooth. I am going to bring my 2 layers of fabric and my Peltex over to my machine. And I like to start with that curved bottom edge. Now I want to stop and start about 1/4 of an inch, and actually exactly 1/4 of an inch. So from that point, I've made a marking on my fabric that this is my start and stop point to get that beautiful, nice, crisp inner corner. And I am going to start my sewing, and I want to go at a slow speed. And I am going to check my threading. I'm going to start sewing from the outer edge and come to that point where I'm going to stop and pivot. And I am turning that presser foot on so that when I come to that stop, I will be able to pivot. And I am just sewing at a comfortable speed, and I am allowing the machine to do the work. So I am turning my fabric, and I am stopping right at that point where I made that marking. And I am now going to turn my fabric, and I'm going to sew that other side of the curve. Now, when I do points and inner curves especially, I like to do a locking stitch right at that pivot point, because I know that I am going to clip that, and that will allow me just added security. And I'm sewing along that curve, and I am turning the fabric, letting that wonderful JUKI feeding system do the work. Now I've reached the point where I am going to turn. I'm actually going to sew off of that fabric and cut. And now I am going to sew the curve. And I'm just getting this in a position, a comfortable position for me. Now note, you want to leave that opening at the neck of the costume where it will be the least noticeable. You don't want to leave an opening along the curve or along that cutout opening by the tail. It just is an area where your eye goes to, and any flaw will show. I am going to start, and I'm doing a little bit of back tacking on my corners to give them added strength, because I will be trimming this away. And I am letting, like I said, the machine do the work. JUKIs have such a wonderful feeding system with that box feed dog system that it makes sewing curves wonderful. Now I'm approaching that pin, so I am going to lock, and I actually want to go a little in reverse, a little forward, and I'm going to go to the other side of where that opening is going to be. And I'm also back tacking a little bit, and I'm going to sew the rest of this curve. Would you believe we're about halfway done with this wonderful costume? I love doing quick, easy projects. Every once in a while, you just need that instant gratification. And I'm going to back tack at that corner. Wonderful. So now I'm going to bring this to my table. And I am removing my pins. They have done their work. and I'm just going to give myself some room. And with a scissor at the point, I just want to nick into that. I do not want to cut my thread, and I'm going to do several nicks all along the curve, and I am going to trim that corner. Now be careful not to cut your threads. And I'm just going to, every so often, about every inch or two, I'm clipping along that curved line. What this will do is, it will allow, when I turn this inside out and press, it will allow the curve to take a beautiful shape. And we have that all clipped. I'm just trimming up any threads that I have, and we are going to turn this inside out and meet at the iron. As you can see, I've turned this inside out, and you want to take your time doing this. It is not the most easy of things to turn inside out because of the stiffness. The one thing that I like to do is at the points, I'm really careful about what I use to poke those corners out. I used a covered pen, not with the pen tip, and I reached inside to really poke those corners out and just give it a nice clean finish. Now, as you could see, that rounded edge, by making that stitch length shorter, came out to be a beautiful edge. Now, this is going to look puffy, and it's not going to look like it is laying flat, and it's exactly what I want to happen, to give it that dimension. So now what we're going to do is go to our trusty iron, and we are going to just iron this so that our edges are nice and smooth, paying attention to that V. And look at how beautiful that inside V looks. Now, as I'm pressing this, it will flatten out a little bit. And I did leave that Peltex the same size as the fabric, so that when we did turn it inside out, it had a little bit of extra stiffness along the edge to hold its shape. But what I want to do now is take care of that neck opening. And the first thing that I'm going to do is trim away a little bit of that Peltex to make it easier to turn that inside out. And I'm trimming off about 1/8 of an inch. You'll see there I trimmed very little off. And this is just allowing me to be able to turn that fabric under. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to worry about one side at a time. Now, I like to iron on a wool mat, as you can see. And this sometimes helps me when I'm ironing, when I need a pin or two. And I'm going to get my pin. And what I do is, especially here in the corner where I need that held, that wool mat allows me to use the pin as almost a second set of hands. Now, when I come in with my iron, when I'm right up against that pin, I'm going to remove it because it's done its job. And on the other side too. And what you will see is that that fabric is turned under on one side. And then I could do the same with the opposite side and just turn that under. And I may need to trim just a little bit more because that's fighting me. Could always trim more. Now, this will allow me to trim and put that fabric under, because we are going to top stitch that. So I am going to set a couple of pins in there. And what I want to do is, one of my fabrics is going around that Peltex so that I don't have a white edge in between my red fabric. All I'm seeing are those red edges. Now, some of you may be also asking the pattern that Flappy was created from, and I will put that in the credits at the end. And I am just going to give that another little bit of an iron. You could never over iron. And I'm giving this a little bit of steam. I love it. Now we're going to place our circles. And I'm going to get that out of the way. And remember, with our circles, we have that paper backing. So now is when we're going to remove that paper backing. And I find that if I fold and roll in both directions, it will release that paper. And I'm not sure if you could see that or not, but the back side is shiny and it's got a texture to it, and that's the glue. So I am going to release my paper on these, and I am going to put it on what now looks like a Pac-Man. It will turn into a ladybug shortly. And you want to play with the positioning of these circles now before you iron them. What do you think? Is it looking like a ladybug yet? I like it. And this was something just very quick, very easy. I think I like that placement. What do you think? Perfect. So now is also time when you want to think about, how do I want this to attach to my dog coat? So I can decide I want this permanently attached, which I will do. And when I sew down these circles, it will go right onto the dog coat. And I might even do a stitch over here and a stitch in red thread to the dog coat. Or we could do this as a temporary. So we could add a little bit of Velcro right by the collar of the dog coat and a little bit in that same area, and attach this where it could be removed if you would like to get use out of the dog coat. But as I said, for me, I'm going to be attaching this permanently. So I am going to take a look at that. And I know that 1, 2, 3 circles can be sewn right to my dog coat. I am good with the placement of these circles because I've checked where they're going to go on that dog coat, in comparison to that sewing. I may even move these a little bit closer together, but I'm not liking that. So I may even attach this to my stitching around the neck and this one circle. Now that I'm really secure and I know I like where these circles are, we are going to permanently attach them. You'll see that is attached and gets sticky. And you want to let that glue cool down before you play with it like I just did to make it permanent. Now, read the directions on the product. Some fusible web type products are washable and some are not. So you want to pay close attention to that manufacturer's instruction. This is looking so nice. We're creating ladybugs. Perfect. Now we're going to head back to the machine, but I'm going to explain what I will be doing first. We are going to be doing some top stitching along the edge for a nice little detail. And I'm going to do that with my straight stitch foot, and I'm going to show you how I like to use that for top stitching. I will be using a triple stitch, which will really stand out and be prominent. Now you may want to check with your machine if these stitches are available. I will be showing them to you on the screen. And I am also going to applique down each one of the circles. So if your machine happens to be one of the straight stitch onlys, you can do a straight stitch around here. Or you could leave it exactly the way it is now and call it finished and just attach it to your dog coat. But I do want to do a little bit of extra stitching. So let's go to the machine. So we're back at the machine and I wanted to show you the stitching that we will be doing. My top stitching with a triple stitch is that stitch right along the edge. And I really like this stitch because it goes back and forth 3 times and makes the thread look thicker and more prominent. And then I will be appliquing and doing that decorative stitch around all of the circles. Now, both of these steps are completely optional, but I just find that they look beautiful. So I'm going to go to my screen to show you those stitches. And I'm just going to give my camera person a moment to get that focused and in place. Now the stitch that I am using is on my machine number 4. It looks like 3 sets of dotted lines. And that's to explain that the stitching goes back and forth 3 times. And when I choose that, it defaults to a length of 2.5, but I want to go all the way to the longest length of 5. I really like the way this stitch looks long. It does look like a lot of the top stitching on commercial garments, which is why I like it. I am still with my straight stitch plate and my straight stitch foot. I think this is the best foot to use to do top stitching right along the edge of anything, and I'm going to show you in a moment. I am going to start at that inside point. So I'm going to lift my foot, and what I am doing, I'm going to show you right at that foot. I am lining up the edge of my costume with the inside edge of the foot. And that inside edge becomes my guide for doing the top stitching. Now, if you've never tried this method, please slow down your machine and let's do that. Now, I am using a 40 weight embroidery thread, both in my needle end in my bobbin, I just took one stitch and pulled up my bobbin thread, and I am going to put all of those threads underneath my foot to neaten them up. And I'm doing that because I just want it to look very finished and very clean. And I am going to top stitch, guiding that fabric, and I'm going to slow this down so that you could really see what it's doing. And I'm moving my hands out of the way, and I'm actually going to move Flappy out of the way. When I get to that point, I want to stop, and I'm using that needle up down as a way of getting my needle exactly where I need it to stop, right along the edge. And I'm going to trim my threads because I always forget them later on. And now I'm going to follow this curve, and I do want that machine to really do the work. I'm guiding the fabric to keep that curve shape. And that lip of the costume is just bumping into that inner edge of the foot, giving me a nice straight line. And as you can see, I'm just going all around that costume. Now, depending on the machine that you're at, you may or may not have this stitch, so just a regular top stitch or even a decorative stitch would look really cute on this. And now I'm coming up to that neck opening, so here I definitely want to slow myself down because I want to be able to pull out those pins as they get to my needle. I don't want to sew over those pins. And the reason you don't want to sew over those pins is because it can affect the timing and the way that needle hits and reaches into that bobbin area. Now I notice that my fabric just moves slightly, so I'm using the pin to get that back into position. And here, where I'm dealing with the pins and an opening and fabric that could be shifting or moving, you notice that I slowed down. And I just noticed right at that edge that that fabric shifted a little bit. So I'm holding that in place. And again, removing those pins as I approach them. And we are going to continue this all the way around. And I just think that gives it a really pretty, polished, finished look. Again, that's absolutely optional. And just allow your machine to really do the work. Don't force that fabric. As you can see, I'm like barely moving that fabric. It's just a gentle touch. And I'm approaching that corner, so I'm going to slow down. And I stopped right at that corner, but if you didn't stop in time, that needle up down will advance that position nicely. And now I'm aiming to stop right where I started, and I want to do a locking stitch at that point to secure my stitch. And what a locking stitch is, if you're not familiar with it, when I touch that dot on my machine, the needle will go up and down in place, locking and securing my stitch. So now I stopped just a couple of needle penetrations before I wanted to, and this is where I want to lock. So when I touch that dot and either touch my foot pedal or the stop start button, that needle went in place and locked that stitch. So isn't that beautiful? The way that edging is just nice and even all around. Now I'm going to switch out of my straight stitch foot because I'd like to do some decorative stitching. And again, I am going to raise and twist, and I'm going to go to my zigzag plate because I am going to go to a decorative stitch to finish off my circles. And before I do that, I need to change out my feed dogs. What I like is that when you make a mistake, it really does let you know that you've done the wrong thing. So I'm going back to my feed dogs. I am putting those onto the machine, and I'm just making sure that my thread is not caught, and I've used my zigzag feed dogs, and that is a 7-piece box system feed dog, and now that snaps right into place. I'm going to put away a couple of my feet that I am not using. The foot that I like to use for doing my decorative stitching and my applique is the O foot. This is the open toe foot. And I like this because it gives me complete visibility of my stitches, and it allows me to see exactly where I'm sewing. So that as I'm sewing, I can really get a good, clear view of what I'm doing. I'm going to give that a little bit more light because we're going to get really close up with this. Now I'm choosing my stitch on my DX 4000 QVP, and I'm going to applique. And you can basically use any one of these stitches. The settings, I would say, really test them out because the width of my stitch is really going to be determined by how big my circles are. So on a larger dog, I may have a 3-inch circle. I can use a little bit of a bigger stitch, whereas with these tiny circles, I want to use something a little bit smaller. I'm going to pick one of the applique stitches, and I like this one because it's varied lengths. And I am going to narrow this down, and I am going to go to a width of 5 because I have small circles. Now with applique, I'm going to try and get really nice and close up to what I'm stitching so that you could see this action. I am going to applique one of the circles, and then we're going to go into the completion of the dog coat. But you would do this on all of the circles. So I am going to pick one, and I want to drop my needle so that I am right at the edge between the black fabric and the red fabric. Now for this, I really do like to slow my machine down, and there are a few ways of doing applique, but I'm going to show you what I like, and I really like to use that feeding system of the machine to guide me. I am starting to sew, and I want to pay attention to how it is moving. So it takes one bite and does 3 stitches forward. When my machine is doing the 3 stitches forward is when I am moving my fabric so that I am following the curve of that circle. Now I may reach a point where I do need to stop and pivot, and that's okay. Like I think I'm at that point right now. I'm at such a sharp angle that I just need to adjust that fabric so that I get a nice smooth edge. And you want to do that as often as you need to. And I like to do this nice and slow so that I really get a feel for where that needle is going to go next. And it allows me to adjust and move my fabric to go completely around. Now, as I said, this is a decorative, optional. You could use any decorative stitch that you would like, or leave them just with the fusible web and raw edge with nothing. Now I'm going to complete one circle. You would be doing this on all of them that you put down on your costume. I wanted to do this just to show how it's done. And I love that open foot because it really gives me a clear view of where my needle is going and what I am doing. And again, when I reach the end, I will use my locking stitch to secure that stitching. And I'm going to do that right now where they've met up. And I have my machine set to lock as it does that. So I did stitching all around that circle, as I did with the costume on Happy. And I'm going to turn him around so that you could see that all of those circles are stitched. And I think it just gives it a nice decorative element. I'm going to bring the dog coat over because now we're going to attach the dog coat to my circle. And I'm going to do that on the table. Now this dog coat does have a collar like most do. So I want to line up that top portion with the bottom. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this in half and just put a pin where that center is for the bottom of the dog coat. So I want to make sure that I am lining that up nicely. And here I am. I know that my dog coat, now because I am attaching this permanently, I am going to do a little bit of stitching and stitch this down. So I am going to add a couple of pins. I will probably stitch down that one circle. I'm going to do a little bit of stitching at the collar and a little bit of stitching, maybe just a tack at that V. So I will bring that dog coat over to my machine. And I still have my applique stitch set And that's actually how I'm going to attach at that collar. I just think that decorative stitch is really pretty. And if any of my fabric did not catch in that folded edge, it gives me a second chance to really secure all of those fabrics. I am following, and I am going to increase this to a stitch width of 7 because I really want this to hold securely. And I am going right at the edge of the seam of the collar with the seam right at the top of the costume. Now you may decide, and you can pin this in place if you need to, that this is the only place that you want to secure your costume. You want to really think about how cold, how windy your weather situations for October in your area. And I come to that locking point. I really like that locking stitch. And I have this secured just at the top. And you could see how this is already standing out very differently than the one on Flappy. And I'm going to switch to this costume on him and do a quick change. But I am going to stitch that circle just so that this lays in place nicely. And what I sometimes like to do when I'm doing applique is you could choose a different stitch for every circle. Most of the JUKI machines come with several applique stitch choices, and I like switching that out. Now, you see me using my needle up down to advance and get to that just right spot in that stitch. That's a really nice trick. And you could see how effortlessly I am turning and guiding along that circle. Now, as I am stitching this, I am going through that dog coat as well. So this is also further securing that costume top. And I'm going to do a quick change on Happy. For those of you watching me, I'm sure you're wishing that your dog would behave just as nicely so that you could get costumes on and off of them. And I am securing around the neck and around the belly. What I love with that Timtex is I can fold, I can shape, but I just like how that sticks out and is not as structured on the first one that I made. So this one is just batting with no iron on. This is with the Peltex. The foam stabilizer would also give you that nice stiff effect, as well as iron-on batting that's iron-on for both sides. So come on over. I hope you've enjoyed this project and enjoyed making that. I think this is a really nice, quick, easy project for you to make. And I hope to be sharing more quick, easy projects for you, for your friends, and to give as gifts in the future. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.